The morning of September 14th, 1997, arrived in Millbrook with the kind of clarity that makes ordinary moments feel suspended in amber. Sunday light filtered through the maples lining residential streets, casting dappled shadows across sidewalks still damp from the previous night's rain. The air carried that particular September scent. Cut grass mingling with the first whisper of autumn decay. Wood smoke from someone's early fire. The faint sweetness of overripe apples falling in backyard orchards. Church bells from First Baptist began their call at 7:30 sharp, a sound that had marked Sunday mornings in this town of 12,000 for more than a century, traveling across screened porches where families lingered over coffee, through open kitchen windows where breakfast dishes clattered in sinks, down quiet streets where newspapers still lay rolled in driveways. In the Hartley household on Maple Street, a white two-story colonial with forest green shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Two girls were moving through their morning routine with the particular energy of children who'd been promised something small but meaningful after church. Lunch at the diner, maybe, or a stop at the bookstore. Rebecca, 13 years old and newly conscious of how she appeared to the world, stood before the bathroom mirror working a brush through shoulder-length brown hair that always tangled at the nape of her neck. She'd chosen carefully that morning, a pale yellow sundress her grandmother had sent 3 weeks earlier for her birthday. The fabric soft cotton with small white daisies embroidered along the hem in a pattern that caught the light. The dress was perhaps a bit more formal than her usual Sunday wear. But Rebecca liked the way it moved when she walked, liked the feeling of being almost grown up. 10-year-old Lily was less concerned with appearances. She'd pulled on her favorite denim overalls, the ones with the brass buttons and the small rip at the left knee that Catherine kept meaning to mend, over a red gingham shirt that she'd worn so many times the collar had softened to the texture of silk. Around her left ankle, she wore a braided friendship bracelet she'd made at summer camp in July, its threads, purple, yellow, green, and blue, still bright, despite weeks of swimming and running through sprinklers and all the rough play of late summer. She'd tied the knot herself, proud of the pattern she'd learned, and told Rebecca it would last forever if she never took it off. Rebecca had rolled her eyes at the time but felt a small surge of affection watching her sister now, hopping on one foot while trying to pull on a sock, humming something tuneless and happy. Their mother, Catherine, moved through the house with the efficient distraction of someone managing multiple small tasks simultaneously. She'd been up since 6:30, had already started a load of laundry, watered the tomato plants on the back porch, reviewed the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. Now she stood in the living room running an iron over a cream-colored blouse, the board set up near the window where she could watch the street, see neighbors beginning to emerge from houses in their Sunday clothes. The radio played softly from the kitchen, a news program, something about politics that Catherine wasn't really listening to. She glanced at the kitchen clock mounted above the stove. 8:37. Church started at 9. The walk took 12 minutes if the girls didn't dawdle, which they usually did, stopping to examine interesting rocks or comment on neighbors' gardens or debate some intricate social dynamic from school that Catherine could never quite follow. Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs, the yellow dress swishing. "Mom, can Lily and I leave now? We said we'd meet Jenna and Marissa before Sunday school starts." Catherine looked up from the ironing board, mentally calculating. 8:37 now, 12-minute walk if they moved steadily, meant arrival around 8:50. Sunday school didn't start until 9:15, after the opening hymn and announcements. Plenty of time. "Did you eat breakfast?" she called up. "Cereal." Lily had toast. Did Lily actually eat the toast or just shred it into pieces? A pause, then Rebecca's slightly exasperated voice. "She ate most of it." Catherine smiled despite herself. Lily had a habit of deconstructing her food, arranging it into patterns, building small sculptures that she found far more interesting than actually eating. "Okay, stay together, walk on the sidewalk, and I'll see you there. I need to finish getting ready." Rebecca's footsteps thundered down the stairs with the particular heavy grace of a 13-year-old who hadn't quite grown into her lengthening limbs. Lily followed, slower, still humming. Catherine heard the screen door open, the particular creak of the spring that David kept meaning to oil. She called out, "Love you both." "Love you," came Rebecca's voice, already distant. Lily's smaller voice echoed it, and then the door clapped shut, and there was just the sound of the iron hissing against fabric and the radio murmuring from the kitchen. Catherine glanced out the window in time to see the girls moving down the front walk. Rebecca tall and slim in her yellow dress. Lily shorter and sturdy beside her, overalls already somehow rumpled. Their white patent leather shoes, polished the night before until they gleamed, caught the sunlight. Catherine watched them reach the sidewalk, turn left toward downtown where First Baptist's white steeple rose above the tree line. And then they moved out of sight behind the Lewis's hedge. She turned back to her ironing. The clock read 8:42. If you're watching this story unfold from wherever you are in the world right now, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're joining us from. It helps us understand how these stories connect people across distances and why they matter to so many. By 8:55, Catherine had finished dressing and was gathering her purse, her Bible, the bulletin from last week that she'd forgotten to recycle. David was already at work. He'd taken the Sunday shift at the textile mill on the edge of town, a double shift that meant overtime pay they needed for Rebecca's braces and the leak in the roof that kept getting worse. Catherine didn't love attending church alone, but the routine mattered to her, the sense of community, the way the familiar hymns settled something anxious in her chest. She locked the front door, walked to the car, a beige station wagon with a dent in the rear bumper from where she'd backed into a parking barrier at the grocery store, and drove the route she could have navigated blindfolded. Maple Street to Hickory, Hickory to Main, Main to the church parking lot where she found a spot under the large oak tree that had been there longer than the church itself. Inside, the sanctuary was already half full. People settling into pews, children squirming in their Sunday clothes, the organist running through scales in preparation for the opening hymn. Catherine scanned the familiar faces, looking for the yellow dress, the denim overalls. She didn't see them. A small flutter of concern moved through her chest, but she pushed it down. They must be in the basement already, in the Sunday school rooms where the younger groups gathered. Rebecca was probably showing Lily where to go, being responsible the way she'd been lately, trying on the role of big sister in new, more mature ways. Catherine slid into the Hartley family's usual pew, third from the front on the left side, the spot they'd occupied for 5 years, ever since moving to Millbrook, and arranged herself, smoothing her skirt, placing her Bible on the wooden bench beside her. The service began at 9 sharp. Pastor Williams moved to the pulpit, welcomed the congregation, led them in the opening hymn. Catherine sang mechanically, her eyes drifting to the basement door at the back of the sanctuary, willing Rebecca and Lily to emerge. When the hymn ended and announcements began, she kept watching. When the collection plate passed, she dropped in her envelope and kept watching. By 9:30, when Pastor Williams was deep into his sermon about parables and patience, Catherine's hands were clenched in her lap. By 9:45, when Sunday school groups were dismissed early to join their families for the final hymn, neither girl appeared. Catherine stood abruptly, drew the attention of the woman sitting behind her who gave her a questioning look. Catherine mouthed, "Bathroom," and slipped out of the pew, moving quickly toward the basement stairs. Downstairs, the hallways were chaotic with children pouring from classrooms, teachers gathering craft supplies, the smell of paste and construction paper and too many bodies in small spaces. Catherine found Mrs. Chen, who taught the middle school group. "Have you seen Rebecca?" Mrs. Chen looked puzzled. "Rebecca Hartley? She wasn't in class this morning." "She wasn't here?" "No. I assumed she was sick." Catherine's pulse kicked up. She found the elementary teacher, Miss Abbott, who confirmed Lily hadn't attended either. Catherine moved through the basement with increasing urgency, checking bathrooms, the storage room, the small kitchen where coffee was brewed for adult Bible study. Nothing. She climbed the stairs, found the youth pastor chatting with a group of teenagers near the entrance. "Have you seen my girls this morning?" He shook his head, concern crossing his face. "I haven't. Is everything okay?" Catherine didn't answer, just pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the bright September morning. The parking lot was emptying, families loading into cars, children running across the grass. She scanned every face, every small figure, looking for yellow fabric, for denim overalls, for the particular shapes of her daughters. Her chest felt tight. She crossed the lawn, checked the playground behind the church where younger children sometimes lingered after services. Empty. She walked the perimeter of the building, calling their names, her voice growing sharper with each repetition. "Rebecca! Lily!" The church lawn stretched silent around her. Just the wind moving through the oak leaves and the distant sound of car engines starting. Catherine returned to the parking lot, found Jenna and Marissa, the friends Rebecca had mentioned, climbing into their mother's minivan. She jogged over. "Did Rebecca and Lily meet up with you this morning?" The girls exchanged glances. Jenna, a thin blonde with braces, shook her head. "We didn't make plans to meet them, Mrs. Hartley. I haven't seen Rebecca since Thursday at school." Catherine felt the ground tilt slightly. "She told me she was meeting you before Sunday school." We didn't." Jenna looked at her mother for help. Jenna's mother, Linda, stepped forward. "Catherine, what's wrong?" "My girls aren't here. They left home 45 minutes before church started. Said they were meeting friends, but they never arrived." Linda's expression shifted immediately from polite concern to sharp attention. "Have you called home? Maybe they went back for something?" Catherine hadn't. She'd been so certain they were at church, just misplaced somehow, that calling home hadn't occurred to her. She fumbled for her cell phone, a bulky thing she'd only recently started carrying, and dialed. The phone rang 6 times before the answering machine picked up, her own voice asking callers to leave a message. She hung up, dialed again. Same result. "They're not answering." "I'll drive you home," Linda said immediately. And Catherine didn't argue, just climbed into the passenger seat while Jenna and Marissa sat silent and wide-eyed in the back. The drive took 4 minutes. Catherine was out of the car before it fully stopped, running up the front walk, fumbling with her keys. Inside, the house was exactly as she'd left it. The iron still set up in the living room, the breakfast dishes in the sink, the radio still murmuring from the kitchen. "Rebecca! Lily!" She took the stairs 2 at a time, checked both bedrooms, the bathroom, even the small attic space they used for storage. Empty. She ran back down, checked the basement, the garage. Nothing. The white patent leather shoes still sat by the front door, exactly where Catherine had seen them that morning. Her daughters had left without shoes. Linda appeared in the doorway, phone already to her ear. "I'm calling the police," she said, and Catherine couldn't find the breath to respond, just sank onto the bottom stair and stared at those shoes, polished, pristine, waiting. The Millbrook Police Department sent Officer James Brennan, a man in his late 30s with graying temples and the kind of steady, competent demeanor that probably helped in situations like this. He arrived within 20 minutes of Linda's call, carrying a notebook and asking questions in a voice that managed to be both gentle and urgent. Catherine answered mechanically, her mind moving through details she'd already repeated to herself a dozen times. Yes, they left around 8:42. No, they weren't upset or fighting. Yes, Rebecca had mentioned meeting friends, but that turned out to be incorrect. No, there had been no strangers around the neighborhood lately, no suspicious vehicles, no one who'd made her uncomfortable. Officer Brennan wrote everything down, his pen moving steadily across the page. "Can you describe what they were wearing?" Catherine closed her eyes, summoned the image. Rebecca, she's 13, was wearing a yellow sundress with white daisies embroidered on the hem. It's new, a birthday gift from her grandmother. She's 5'2", slender, shoulder-length brown hair, hazel eyes. She wasn't wearing her shoes, white patent leather. They're right there by the door. Officer Brennan glanced at the shoes, made a note. Lily is 10, 4'8", wavy blonde hair, blue eyes. She was wearing denim overalls and a red gingham shirt, and a friendship bracelet on her left ankle. Braided, colorful. Purple, yellow, green, blue threads. She made it at summer camp. Catherine's voice cracked on the last detail, something about the specificity of that bracelet making everything feel unbearably real. Officer Brennan looked up. "They left without shoes?" "Yes. I don't know why they would do that. Rebecca always wears shoes. She complains if she has to walk barefoot because the grass stains her feet." Brennan stood. "I'm going to radio for additional units. We'll start canvassing the route between here and the church immediately. Do you have recent photos?" Catherine did. School photos from the previous spring. Both girls smiling with varying degrees of enthusiasm at the camera. She found them in the drawer where she kept important documents, handed them over with shaking hands. Brennan studied them for a long moment, memorizing features, then tucked them into his notebook. "We're going to find them, Mrs. Hartley. Most situations like this, children turn up quickly. They get distracted, lose track of time, end up somewhere they didn't expect. We'll check with neighbors, look for anyone who might have seen them this morning. Catherine nodded, wanting desperately to believe him, unable to ignore the cold weight settling in her stomach. Something was wrong. She knew it with a certainty that had no rational basis, just the deep animal knowledge of a mother whose children were not where they should be. Within an hour, 3 additional patrol cars had arrived. Officers spread out through the neighborhood in a careful grid, knocking on doors, asking the same questions. Did you see 2 girls walking this morning? One in a yellow dress, one in overalls? Did you notice any unfamiliar vehicles? Did you hear anything unusual? Most neighbors answered apologetically. They'd been in their own routines, getting ready for church, or reading the paper, or making breakfast, and hadn't been paying attention to the sidewalk. The Lewises, whose hedge blocked the view of the Hartley house, had already left for services in the next town over. The Pattersons across the street remembered seeing 2 girls walking past around 8:45, but hadn't looked closely enough to identify them with certainty. A teenager 4 houses down thought he'd seen a yellow dress, but couldn't remember which direction it had been moving. By noon, the search had expanded. Someone contacted the fire department, which organized a volunteer effort that drew 30 people within an hour. Neighbors, church members, parents from the girls' schools who'd heard the news spreading through the small-town grapevine. They divided the neighborhood into sections, checking backyards, looking behind garden sheds and in drainage ditches, calling the girls' names in voices that grew hoarse with repetition. Someone brought bloodhounds from a farm outside town, 2 enormous dogs with drooping faces and serious eyes that sniffed the air with professional concentration. Their handler, an older man named Mr. Phillips, took them to the front porch, let them smell items from the girls' bedrooms, a pillowcase, a stuffed animal, a sweatshirt draped over a chair. The dogs caught a scent immediately, pulled toward the street with eagerness that sparked hope in Catherine's chest. The bloodhounds followed the trail down Maple Street with determination, noses to the ground, tails high. They moved 3 blocks, turned at the intersection of Maple and Hickory, and then stopped, circled, whined. Mr. Phillips let them try again, but the result was the same. Whatever scent trail they'd been following vanished completely at that intersection. Officer Brennan examined the area carefully. The pavement had been freshly resurfaced 2 days earlier, part of the town's ongoing infrastructure improvements. The tar was still slightly tacky in places, giving off a sharp chemical smell. He crouched, ran his fingers over the surface, and looked up at Mr. Phillips with a question in his eyes. New asphalt disrupts scent trails, Mr. Phillips said quietly. If they got into a vehicle here, we won't be able to track it. A vehicle, Catherine repeated, her voice hollow. She was standing 10 feet away, had insisted on following the dogs despite Officer Brennan's gentle suggestion that she might want to wait at home. Someone took them. Someone put them in a car. We don't know that, Brennan said quickly. There could be other explanations. But Catherine could see in his face that he was already considering the worst possibilities, already shifting from a search for lost children to an investigation of something darker. The volunteers continued their grid search, expanding outward from the intersection, checking storm drains and culverts, peering into parked cars, looking for any sign of yellow fabric or denim, or 2 small bodies that might have hidden or fallen or… Catherine couldn't let herself finish the thought. By late afternoon, additional resources had arrived from the county sheriff's office. A command post was established in the church parking lot, officers coordinating efforts over radios, maps spread across the hoods of patrol cars showing search sectors and priority areas. David arrived home at 4:15. His shift abandoned when his supervisor tracked him down with the news. He looked haggard, disbelieving, kept asking Catherine to explain again what had happened, as if repetition would make it make sense. She went through it mechanically. They left at 8:42. They were supposed to walk to church. They never arrived. David listened, shook his head, pulled her close in an embrace that felt more like mutual drowning than comfort. They stood in their living room as the September light faded outside, surrounded by the evidence of interrupted ordinary life. Breakfast dishes still in the sink, Rebecca's library book on the coffee table, Lily's drawing of a purple horse magnetized to the refrigerator. The house felt both too full of their daughter's presence and emptied of everything that mattered. As evening settled over Millbrook, the search shifted, Volunteers with flashlights moved through the wooded areas at the edge of town, beams cutting through shadows under the pines. The canine units tried again in different locations, hoping for a trail that hadn't been contaminated by fresh asphalt. The State Bureau of Investigation was contacted, protocols activated for missing children. Officer Brennan sat with Catherine and David in their kitchen, going through questions that felt increasingly ominous. Had there been any custody disputes? No. They'd been married 16 years, stable, no issues. Any financial troubles that might suggest a reason for someone to target the family? Nothing extraordinary, just the usual middle-class struggles. Any concerning adults in the girls' lives? Coaches, teachers, neighbors, family friends? Catherine and David looked at each other, mentally reviewing every person their daughters interacted with, finding no red flags. Had the girls seemed upset or secretive lately? Rebecca had been typical teenage moody, but nothing alarming. Lily had been her usual cheerful self. By 10 p.m., when darkness had settled completely and the volunteer search was called off until morning, Catherine sat on her front porch wrapped in a blanket despite the mild temperature, staring down Maple Street as if she could will her daughters to materialize out of the shadows. David sat beside her, silent, his hand gripping hers with enough force to hurt. Neither of them mentioned going inside, going to bed, pretending sleep was possible. Neighbors brought food they couldn't eat, offered words of comfort that slid past without purchase. The only thing that felt real was the absence, the empty space where Rebecca and Lily should be, growing larger and colder with each passing hour. Monday morning arrived with grim determination. The story made the local news at 6 a.m., a brief segment showing the church, the street corner where the dogs had lost the scent, a plea from Catherine asking anyone with information to come forward. Her voice on the television sounded strange to her own ears, too thin, too desperate. By 7, the police station's tip line was ringing. Most calls led nowhere. Someone thought they'd seen 2 girls matching the description at a gas station 30 miles away, but the timing was wrong and the surveillance footage showed different children entirely. A man reported a white van with out-of-state plates idling near the elementary school on Friday afternoon, which seemed promising until officers tracked the vehicle to a grandfather visiting his daughter, who'd been nowhere near Millbrook on Sunday morning, and had receipts to prove it. Each lead required investigation, documentation, elimination. Each dead end deepened the growing sense that Rebecca and Lily had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. Detective Laura Finch arrived from the State Bureau on Monday afternoon. She was in her mid-40s, with cropped gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, the kind of person who projected competence so thoroughly that Catherine felt a surge of hope just watching her spread case files across the dining room table. Detective Finch asked many of the same questions Officer Brennan had, but with a different quality of attention. Listening not just to what Catherine and David said, but to what they didn't say, how they said it. The small hesitations and inflections that might reveal something useful. She asked to see the girls' rooms. Catherine led her upstairs, watching as Finch moved through the spaces with careful observation. Rebecca's room was typical teenage territory. Posters of bands Catherine didn't recognize, a bulletin board covered with photos of friends, schoolwork scattered across the desk, clothes draped over the chair. Lily's room was younger, more chaotic. Stuffed animals arranged on the window seat, art supplies spilling from a plastic bin, a collection of rocks and interesting leaves displayed on the dresser. Finch opened drawers, looked through closets, checked under beds. She asked Catherine if anything seemed out of place, if any items were missing that might suggest the girls had packed or prepared to leave. Catherine looked around her daughter's rooms with new eyes, trying to see what wasn't there rather than what was. Nothing seemed missing. Everything waited in suspended animation for their return. Detective Finch spent the next week building a comprehensive timeline. She interviewed Rebecca's friends, her teachers, the softball coach who'd worked with her that summer. She spoke with Lily's 4th-grade teacher, her Sunday school instructor, the mother of her best friend from camp. She examined the Hartley family's financial records, phone bills, David's work schedule, Catherine's volunteer commitments. She interviewed neighbors for a 3-block radius, asking about domestic disturbances, unusual arguments, any indication that the family dynamic was other than it appeared. She found nothing. By every account, Rebecca and Lily were happy, well-adjusted children from a stable, loving home. There were no custody issues, no concerning adults in their orbit, No suspicious online activity. Rebecca didn't have her own computer yet, and the family's shared desktop showed only school research and age-appropriate browsing history. Surveillance footage presented another dead end. Only 2 businesses along the route between the Hartley home and First Baptist had security cameras in 1997, and both faced the wrong direction, capturing parking lots rather than sidewalks. Detective Finch requested footage anyway. Watched hours of grainy video showing nothing useful. She filed requests with the FBI to enter the girls into national databases. The National Crime Information Center's Missing Persons File. The Violent Criminal Apprehension Program Case Registry. She coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions, cross-referencing similar disappearances, looking for patterns that might suggest a serial predator operating in the region. The work was methodical, exhaustive, and largely fruitless. 3 days after the disappearance, a lead briefly rekindled hope. A clerk at the Greyhound bus station 40 miles north called to report that 2 young girls matching Rebecca and Lily's descriptions had purchased tickets to Richmond on Sunday afternoon, paying in cash. The older girl had done all the talking, the clerk said, and seemed nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. Detective Finch and Officer Brennan drove to Richmond immediately, showed photos at hotels, homeless shelters, the bus terminal. No one recognized the girls. Security footage from the Millbrook station was reviewed. Grainy, shot from an angle that obscured faces, but the clothing clearly didn't match. The taller girl wore jeans and a dark jacket, not a yellow sundress. The timestamp showed the purchase at 1:45 p.m., more than 5 hours after Rebecca and Lily had left home. Detective Finch pressed the clerk on the identification. Had she actually looked at the missing persons flyer carefully before calling? Or had she just seen 2 young girls together and made an assumption? The clerk, defensive at first, finally admitted she processed dozens of customers every day and couldn't be absolutely certain. It was the yellow paper of the flyer that had caught her eye, she said, bright against the gray wall of the station. Not necessarily the faces themselves. The lead went into the file marked unverified, and the search continued. Weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Autumn arrived in earnest, temperatures cooling, leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and orange and red before falling to blanket the sidewalks Rebecca and Lily used to walk. Catherine raked them mechanically, unable to stand the sight of them piling up, unable to stop seeing her daughters running through leaf piles in previous years, their laughter bright in the October air. Halloween approached, that particular holiday that used to mean weeks of planning costumes and mapping trick-or-treat routes. Catherine couldn't bring herself to buy candy, couldn't stand the thought of opening the door to other people's children, while her own remained missing. She and David turned off the porch light, sat in the darkened living room, and pretended not to hear the doorbell when optimistic trick-or-treaters tried anyway. The investigation continued, but the daily urgency faded as days became weeks. Detective Finch still called regularly with updates, a tip that needed following, a sighting that hadn't panned out, a new database cross-reference to try. Local news stations ran follow-up stories at the 1-month mark, appealing again for information, showing age-progressed sketches of what the girls might look like now. Catherine and David sat for interviews, begged anyone who might know anything to come forward. The reward fund, established by community donations, grew to $15,000. Posters remained taped in store windows, their bright yellow paper fading to cream in the sun, edges curling, but the tips that trickled in led nowhere. Catherine kept the girls' rooms exactly as they'd left them. Rebecca's bed remained unmade. Sheets tangled the way she always left them, despite Catherine's nagging. The library book on her nightstand, some fantasy novel about dragons, remained checked out, accumulating fines Catherine quietly paid. Lily's stuffed animals stayed arranged on the window seat in the precise order she'd left them, a hierarchy only she understood. Catherine dusted weekly, vacuumed monthly, changed nothing. Friends gently suggested that perhaps it wasn't healthy, this preservation of absence, but Catherine couldn't imagine disturbing anything. What if the girls came home and found their rooms altered? What if they needed everything to be exactly as they remembered? David handled grief differently. He returned to work after 2 weeks, threw himself into extra shifts with an intensity that worried his supervisor. He stopped sleeping in the master bedroom, instead falling asleep on the couch downstairs with the television on. Local news running on repeat in case there was an update. He lost weight, grew quiet, moved through the house like a ghost haunting his own life. He and Catherine existed in parallel, sharing space but unable to bridge the gulf of their separate anguish. They tried, occasionally, would sit together at dinner, attempt conversation that died after a few stilted exchanges, retreat back into their individual silences. Christmas of 1997 was unbearable. Catherine's mother urged them to come to her house in Pennsylvania to get away from the emptiness, but Catherine refused to leave. What if the girls came home and found the house dark, locked, abandoned? She set up the tree because not doing so felt like admitting defeat, but left it mostly undecorated. On Christmas Eve, she wrapped presents for Rebecca and Lily anyway, books and art supplies and clothes they'd probably outgrown already, and placed them under the tree where they sat alongside unwrapped gifts from relatives who didn't know what else to do. Catherine set the table for Christmas dinner with 4 places, then had to remove 2, her hands shaking so badly she dropped a plate that shattered across the kitchen floor. She left the pieces there for 3 hours before finally cleaning them up. David drove to First Baptist on Christmas Eve for the candlelight service. He sat alone in a back pew, unable to sing the carols, unable to pray, watching families with young daughters and feeling something sharp lodge in his chest. When the service ended and people filed out into the cold December night, wishing each other Merry Christmas with varying degrees of forced cheer, David sat until the sanctuary emptied completely. Pastor Williams found him there, asked gently if he wanted to talk, received only a shake of David's head in response. The pastor sat with him anyway, not speaking, just present, until David finally stood and left without a word. As 1998 began, the case officially transitioned from active investigation to cold. Detective Finch assured Catherine and David that this didn't mean the search was ending, just that there were no remaining active leads to pursue. The file would stay open indefinitely. If new information emerged, investigation would resume immediately. In the meantime, she encouraged them to contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, to register with support groups for families of the missing, to consider age progression updates every few years. She spoke with compassion, but also with the practical acceptance of someone who'd worked enough cases to know that some missing children never came home, and families had to find ways to survive that reality. Catherine did contact support groups, found herself in church basements and community centers with other parents who understood the particular hell of not knowing. She learned new vocabulary: ambiguous loss, meaning grief without closure; disenfranchised grief, meaning sorrow that society doesn't fully recognize or validate; complicated bereavement, meaning mourning someone who might not be dead. She learned that holidays and anniversaries would always be difficult, that guilt was a constant companion. What if I'd driven them to church? What if I'd watched them walk farther? What if I'd questioned Rebecca more carefully about meeting friends? She learned that marriages often didn't survive this kind of loss, and resolved to fight against that particular statistical likelihood, though she wasn't sure she had the strength. Years accumulated with surreal speed. 1 year missing. 2 years. 5. Rebecca would have turned 18 in September 2002. Catherine baked a cake, lit candles, sang Happy Birthday in a wavering voice to an empty kitchen. David took a personal day from work, drove to the woods where volunteer searchers had focused their efforts years earlier, walked trails calling his daughter's names even though he knew it was futile. Lily turned 15 in July 2002. Catherine made her favorite dinner: spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, salad with ranch dressing, and set places at the table that remained empty. Technology evolved around their grief. The internet, which had been a novelty in 1997, became ubiquitous. Websites dedicated to missing children proliferated, making it easier to share information across vast distances. Catherine learned to use email, joined online support groups, posted updates to forums frequented by amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Some responses were kind and helpful. Others were cruel in ways that shocked her. People suggesting the girls were dead and she should accept it. People theorizing that Catherine or David must have been involved. People treating real tragedy as entertainment. Catherine learned to ignore the cruelty, focus on the genuine offers of help. In 2007, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, launched, creating a centralized database for cases that had previously existed only in scattered local files. Detective Finch, still checking on the Hartley case periodically, though she'd since been promoted to a supervisory role, suggested entering Rebecca and Lily's information into the new system. Catherine filled out the forms with details she'd memorized but still had to look up for accuracy. Rebecca's height, weight, identifying features, Lily's hair color, eye color, that friendship bracelet that probably no longer existed. The entries went live, joining thousands of other missing persons, visible to law enforcement nationwide. Social media emerged, offering new ways to keep cold cases visible. Catherine created a Facebook page for Rebecca and Lily in 2009, posted photos and information, shared links to news articles about their disappearance. The page gathered followers. Some were friends and family, others were strangers drawn to the story. True crime hobbyists who treated missing persons cases as puzzles to solve. Catherine felt ambivalent about this attention, uncomfortable with how her daughter's tragedy had become content for others to consume, but grateful for the visibility nonetheless. Tips still came in occasionally. Someone thought they'd seen a woman who looked like Rebecca might look now. Someone remembered a detail from 1997 that they'd never reported, though none led to breakthroughs. In 2015, 18 years after the disappearance, Millbrook Police Department received a grant to digitize old case files. A young analyst named Jenna Voss, fresh from a specialized training program in forensic genealogy and cold case investigation, was assigned to review cases predating modern database protocols. She worked methodically through boxes of files, scanning documents, entering data into updated systems, looking for patterns or connections that earlier investigators might have missed without access to current technology. The Hartley case caught Jenna's attention immediately, not because of evidence present in the file, but because of a significant gap in the investigation. She reviewed Detective Finch's original notes, saw the thorough timeline, the comprehensive interviews, the coordination with federal agencies. But nowhere in the file was there record that Rebecca and Lily's DNA profiles had been entered into CODIS, the combined DNA index system used by law enforcement nationwide. In 1997, the process for obtaining and uploading familial DNA samples had been neither standardized nor routine, especially for cases where no crime scene evidence existed to compare against. Without bodies, without a clear abduction scene, without physical evidence, there had been nothing to test DNA against, so collecting it hadn't been a priority. But forensic technology had advanced dramatically in 18 years. CODIS now contained millions of profiles. More importantly, it cross-referenced with other databases, missing persons registries, unidentified remains databases, systems used by hospitals and child welfare agencies. If Rebecca or Lily had ever interacted with law enforcement, healthcare systems, or been entered into child welfare databases under different names, their DNA could potentially flag a match. Jenna reached out to Catherine and David through the phone number listed in the file, which remarkably was still their current home number. She introduced herself, explained the gap she'd identified, and carefully outlined how familial DNA collection might be valuable even after so many years. Catherine agreed immediately, desperate for any action that felt productive. David was more hesitant. Years of dead-end leads had made him wary of hope, but ultimately consented. They provided samples at the police station on an unseasonably warm April afternoon in 2015. The process was simple. Cheek swabs, basic consent forms, a few minutes of paperwork. The samples were sent to a state lab with priority processing flags. Within 3 weeks, Catherine and David's DNA profiles had been uploaded to CODIS, entered into NAMUS, and cross-referenced with several other national and regional databases. Familial profiles for Rebecca and Lily, reconstructed based on the known genetic relationships, were generated and uploaded as well, marked with high-priority flags for missing children. Jenna also suggested expanding the search into less conventional databases. Many states had begun digitizing child welfare records, and there was an outside possibility that if the girls had ended up in foster care under different names, either through illegal adoptions, identity fabrication, or trafficking into the system, a data match might eventually surface. It was a long shot, Jenna admitted, but forensic genealogy had recently started solving cases that had been considered impossible. New tools meant new possibilities. The Hartleys left the police station that day with something they hadn't felt in years. A thread of hope, faint and fragile, but real. Catherine researched forensic genealogy obsessively over the following months, read about cold cases solved after decades, remains identified through distant relatives' DNA, missing persons found alive under assumed identities. The science felt like magic, the idea that genetic code could reach across time and distance to reconnect severed family bonds. 25 years is a lifetime. By October 2022, Rebecca would have been 38 years old, Lily, 35. Catherine was 62, her hair fully silvered, her hands gnarled with arthritis that made simple tasks difficult. David was 65, semi-retired from the mill, filling his days with small projects around the house that he never quite finished. They still lived on Maple Street, though the neighborhood had changed dramatically. Young families had moved in, renovated the old houses with modern sensibilities. The Lewis's hedge had been removed, replaced with a pristine lawn. The oak tree outside First Baptist, the one where Catherine used to park for services, had been taken down after a storm damaged it beyond saving. Catherine still walked to church most Sundays, though she'd long since stopped actively approaching strangers with photos. The ritual had become more about maintaining her daughter's presence in her own mind than believing it would yield results. She walked the same route they'd taken that last morning, Maple to Hickory, Hickory to Main, Main to the church parking lot, and sometimes in moments of particular pain or particular hope, she spoke to them as if they could hear. Told them about her day, about David, about how much they were missed, how their rooms waited unchanged, how she would never stop looking. The case remained officially open, reviewed annually, but no detective had actively worked it in over a decade. Detective Finch had retired years ago, sent Catherine a Christmas card each year with a short note promising she still remembered, still hoped. The reward fund had been absorbed into a nonprofit supporting families of missing children, doing more good there than sitting dormant. The yellow missing persons flyers had long since disappeared from store windows, replaced by new tragedies, newer appeals. Catherine and David had made a kind of peace with not knowing. Not acceptance, exactly, but a recognition that they could survive it, even if they couldn't understand it. On the evening of October 3, 2022, Catherine was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Nothing elaborate: chicken breasts, roasted vegetables, the simple meals that suited their smaller household and diminished appetites. David was in the living room, television on to the local news, volume low enough that Catherine could hear it as background noise without making out specific words. She was rinsing lettuce at the sink when the doorbell rang. They rarely had unexpected visitors anymore. Most of their friends knew to call first. Deliveries were usually left on the porch without ringing. Catherine glanced at the kitchen clock, 6:47 p.m., and called to David. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," he called back, and she heard him mute the television, heard his footsteps moving toward the front door. Catherine dried her hands on a dish towel and followed, curious, arriving in the foyer just as David opened the door. A woman stood on the porch in the gathering dusk. She was thin to the point of fragility, dressed in jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail that showed strands of premature gray. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white, and her head was slightly bowed as if she couldn't quite bring herself to make eye contact. She looked up as the door opened, and Catherine's first thought was that she must be selling something, canvassing for charity, or perhaps lost and looking for directions. Then the woman spoke, and her voice, rough, uncertain, but unmistakable in its desperate hope, said one word. "Dad?" David froze. The word seemed to move through him without processing, as if his brain couldn't connect the sound to any possible meaning. He stared at the woman, his face blank with incomprehension. Catherine felt her own thoughts stuttering, unable to grasp what was happening. The woman's eyes, hazel, red-rimmed with tears already forming, shifted to Catherine. "Mom, it's me," her voice broke. "It's Rebecca." The world tilted. Catherine felt her knees give out, felt David catch her, his hands shaking as badly as hers, his breathing suddenly harsh and rapid. The woman, Rebecca, could it be Rebecca, after 25 years, standing on their porch like it was just another Sunday evening, took a tentative step forward, hands reaching out, and Catherine lunged toward her, pulled her inside, touched her face, her arms, her hair, confirming solidity, confirming reality. They collapsed into each other in the foyer, 3 bodies tangling together, sobbing with sounds that were barely human. grief and shock and disbelieving joy mixing into something primal. Catherine ran her hands over Rebecca's face again and again, tracing features that were both familiar and foreign. This was her daughter's bone structure, her daughter's eyes, but aged, hardened, marked by experiences Catherine couldn't imagine. Rebecca's hands gripped Catherine's arms with desperate strength, as if afraid that letting go would make this moment disappear. David finally managed words. How? Where? How is this possible? They moved to the living room in a stumbling tangle, Catherine unwilling to release Rebecca, David hovering close enough to touch. Rebecca perched on the edge of the armchair, the same chair where she used to curl up doing homework, and Catherine noticed for the first time how her daughter held herself, spine rigid, shoulders hunched, ready to flee. 25 years of absence showed in every line of her body, every wary glance, every hesitation. Catherine's voice came out as a whisper. Where were you? What happened? Are you hurt? Do you need a doctor? Where's Lily? Rebecca's face crumpled at her sister's name, and the hope that had surged in Catherine's chest turned instantly to ice. I don't know where Lily is, Rebecca said, her voice thick with tears. I haven't seen her since that day. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Over the hours that followed, and the days and weeks that came after, in conversations with police, therapists, federal investigators, Rebecca's story emerged in fragments, pieces of a nightmare that had begun on an ordinary September morning and lasted for years. She spoke haltingly, sometimes stopping mid-sentence to cry or to gather courage, sometimes dissociating so completely that Catherine had to gently call her back to the present. The story was almost impossible to believe, except that Rebecca's presence made it undeniably real. That Sunday morning in 1997, Rebecca and Lily had left home as planned, walking toward First Baptist through the beautiful September weather Catherine remembered so clearly. They'd been barefoot, both of them, having stepped onto the porch before remembering their shoes and deciding it didn't matter for the first block. They'd just walk carefully and put them on when they got back home after meeting with friends. But they hadn't been planning to meet friends. Rebecca admitted now that she'd lied, invented the excuse because she'd wanted to walk alone with Lily, just the two of them, without their mother hovering. She'd been feeling independent lately, 13, and wanting to prove she was responsible, capable of taking care of her little sister without adult supervision. 3 blocks from home, at the intersection of Maple and Hickory, where the bloodhounds would later lose the scent, a car had pulled up beside them. A dark blue sedan, ordinary in every way except that the woman driving it knew Rebecca's name. The woman had rolled down the passenger window and called out, "Rebecca, Rebecca Hartley." Rebecca had stopped, wary but not immediately frightened. The woman looked normal, maybe 40, with dark hair and a pleasant face, dressed in ordinary clothes. "Yes? Oh, thank God I found you. There's been an accident. Your mother sent me to pick you up, you and your sister. She's at the hospital right now. She's asking for you." Rebecca, at 13, knew the safety rules her parents had drilled into her. Never get in cars with strangers. Never go anywhere with someone you don't know. Always tell an adult if someone makes you uncomfortable. But this woman knew her name. She'd said their mother sent her, and the word accident had sent a spike of pure terror through Rebecca's chest. Lily, hearing that their mother was hurt, had started crying immediately, her face crumpling with fear. "What kind of accident? Is she okay?" Rebecca had asked, her voice shaking. "She's stable, but she needs you both there. She's asking for you. Please, we need to hurry." Rebecca looked down at Lily, who was now sobbing, tugging at Rebecca's arm. The woman's car was clean, ordinary. The woman herself looked concerned but not threatening. And if their mother was really hurt, if she really needed them, Rebecca made a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. "Okay, we'll come." They got into the back seat. The woman smiled, thanked them for being so brave, started driving. Within 2 minutes, Rebecca realized they weren't heading toward the hospital. She knew where Millbrook Memorial was. Everyone did. You could see it from Main Street. And they were driving in the opposite direction. "This isn't the way to the hospital," she said, her voice rising. The woman didn't respond. Rebecca tried the door handle. Child locked. "Let us out! Let us out right now!" Lily was screaming, kicking at the seat. The woman drove faster, turned onto roads Rebecca didn't recognize, heading out of town. Rebecca lunged forward, tried to grab the steering wheel, and the woman backhanded her across the face with shocking force. Rebecca's head snapped back, stars exploding in her vision. Lily screamed louder. The woman reached back and struck Lily too, hard enough that Lily's screaming cut off into stunned silence. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes. Rebecca, her face throbbing, held Lily close and tried to memorize landmarks through the window. But they were soon on back roads she'd never seen, surrounded by fields and woods with no houses visible. Eventually the woman turned onto a long gravel driveway, pulled up to a small house. Single story, paint peeling, surrounded by overgrown grass and trees that blocked it from the road. She parked, got out, opened the back door. "Get out. If you scream, if you run, I will find your parents and hurt them. Do you understand?" Rebecca, terrified, nodded. Lily was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. They were pulled from the car, dragged into the house, pushed into a small bedroom with a bare mattress on the floor. A single window with bars already installed, and a lock on the outside of the door. The woman closed the door, and they heard the lock click. They were trapped. What followed was a nightmare that lasted weeks. The woman, who never told them her real name, just insisted they call her Mother eventually, kept them confined to that room most of the time. She fed them sporadically, plain food that Rebecca forced herself and Lily to eat, even when neither of them had appetite. She allowed bathroom breaks under supervision, standing in the doorway watching. She told them repeatedly that their parents had given them away, that no one was looking for them, that they belonged to her now. Rebecca, old enough to recognize this as a lie, fought back verbally and was punished with isolation, locked in a closet so small she couldn't stand up straight, left there for hours in complete darkness, until she learned to stay quiet. The woman focused increasingly on Lily. She was gentler with the younger girl, spoke to her in a softer tone, brought her small treats, a cookie, a coloring book. She told Lily that she was special, that she'd been chosen. Lily, only 10 and traumatized beyond comprehension, began to respond to this twisted version of affection. Rebecca watched helplessly as her sister was groomed, manipulated, slowly turned into someone she didn't recognize. 6 weeks into their captivity, Rebecca tracked the days by scratching marks into the wall with a nail she'd found loose in the floorboard. The woman made an announcement. She was taking Lily somewhere special, to meet a new family who would love her very much. Rebecca begged, screamed, threw herself at the locked door. The woman slapped her, locked her in the bedroom, and left with Lily. Rebecca heard the car start, heard it drive away, and then there was just silence. When the woman returned hours later, she was alone. Rebecca, hoarse from screaming, demanded to know where her sister was. The woman smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made Rebecca's blood run to ice. "Lily has gone to a good home with a nice family. You won't see her again, but she'll be very happy. She's going to have a wonderful life." Rebecca didn't believe her, couldn't let herself believe her. She clung to the hope that Lily was alive somewhere, that they would find each other again. But as days became weeks and weeks became months, and the woman never mentioned Lily again, never showed any sign that Lily had ever existed, Rebecca's hope began to corrode under the weight of not knowing. After Lily was gone, Rebecca's captivity changed. The woman became less vigilant, perhaps feeling that controlling one child was more manageable than two. Rebecca was allowed out of the bedroom for longer periods, required to help with chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry. The woman homeschooled her with a bizarre, inconsistent curriculum that seemed designed more to fill time than to actually educate. Rebecca was given a new name, Jennifer Clark, and told that this was who she was now. Documents appeared. A birth certificate, a social security card, both forgeries with Rebecca's photo but Jennifer Clark's information. The woman moved twice over the following years, each time to rural areas where neighbors were sparse and questions were few. Rebecca, Jennifer now, at least on paper, turned 14 in captivity, then 15, then 16. Each birthday that passed felt like another piece of herself dying. She knew who she really was, but had no power to prove it, no way to reach anyone who would believe her. The few times she tried to tell people, a cashier during a rare grocery store trip, a woman at a thrift shop, the woman would interrupt, laugh it off as teenage rebellion or a game, and steer her away. No one looked close enough to see the desperation in Rebecca's eyes. No one intervened. At 19, Rebecca, still living as Jennifer, still trapped despite being legally an adult, saw her opportunity. The woman had been drinking heavily that night, something she did with increasing frequency. She passed out on the couch, and for the first time in years, she'd forgotten to lock the front door. Rebecca, who'd been planning and hoping for exactly this kind of moment, didn't hesitate. She grabbed nothing, took nothing, just ran into the night in the clothes she wore. She hitchhiked to the nearest town, found a homeless shelter, collapsed into their care. But by then, she'd been Jennifer Clark for so long, had lived under that identity so completely that when she tried to explain who she really was, Rebecca Hartley from Millbrook, missing for 6 years, the shelter workers assumed she was suffering from a mental health crisis. She had no identification proving her real identity, no way to substantiate her story. When she insisted she'd been kidnapped as a child, they were sympathetic, but skeptical. People in crisis said many things. They processed her as Jennifer Clark, homeless young adult, and connected her with social services. Rebecca spent her 20s adrift. She worked minimum wage jobs, moved frequently, battled depression and PTSD that made normal life feel impossible. She'd tried a few times to research her disappearance online, found old news articles, confirmed her memories were real, but the path back to her family seemed impossibly complex. How do you prove you're someone else when all your documents say otherwise? How do you walk into a police station after 10 years and explain that you're a missing child, now an adult, who no one's been looking for? The few times she'd tried, her explanations came out confused, disjointed, and she'd been dismissed. It wasn't until 2021, when a co-worker mentioned casually that she'd done a DNA test for fun, that something clicked in Rebecca's mind. DNA. That was proof that couldn't be argued with. She ordered a kit from one of the popular ancestry websites, submitted her sample with shaking hands, and waited. When the results came back months later, they showed close familial matches, connections strong enough to indicate parents or siblings in the system. The website's genealogy tools allowed her to build a family tree, and there, in the digital branches, were names she recognized. Catherine Hartley, David Hartley, Millbrook. She found news articles about her disappearance, saw photos of herself and Lily as children, and finally had proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't delusional. She was Rebecca Hartley, and she had a family who'd been looking for her. But it took another year to find the courage to come forward. She worked with a therapist who specialized in trauma, found a legal aid attorney who helped her understand the process of reclaiming her identity. The DNA evidence was conclusive. Law enforcement was notified. The investigation into the woman who'd taken them was reopened, though tracking her proved difficult. Rebecca's memories of addresses were fragmented, and the woman had likely used multiple identities herself. What mattered most to Rebecca in that moment, sitting in her parents' living room for the first time in 25 years, was that she'd found her way home. She was alive. She was real. She was Rebecca again. But Lily. The question of Lily consumed every conversation that followed. Rebecca told investigators everything she remembered about the day her sister was taken from that house. It had been morning, she thought, based on the light. The woman had dressed Lily in clean clothes, had combed her hair. She'd spoken about a couple, called them good people, kind people who'd wanted a daughter very much. Rebecca believed, had to believe, that Lily had been placed with a family through some kind of illegal adoption network, given a new identity, raised as someone else's child. Detective Gary Park, who'd taken over the Hartley case years earlier, coordinated with federal agencies specializing in trafficking and illegal adoptions. Rebecca's DNA was already in the system, now verified and flagged with her true identity. Lily's profile, reconstructed from Catherine and David's samples and the confirmed sibling relationship with Rebecca, was given the highest priority status. Alerts were set across every database: child welfare, hospital records, law enforcement systems, private genealogy companies. If Lily had ever submitted DNA for any reason, if she'd ever been fingerprinted, if her name appeared in any official record under any variant, sophisticated algorithms would catch it. The waiting resumed, but this time with Rebecca present, living proof that the impossible could happen. She moved into a small apartment near her parents but visited often. The reintegration was neither simple nor smooth. 25 years had created strangers. Catherine struggled not to treat Rebecca like the 13-year-old she'd lost, and Rebecca struggled with resentment for the childhood stolen from her. Family therapy became routine. Rebecca was diagnosed with complex PTSD, started medication, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. She found work at a nonprofit supporting trafficking survivors, channeling her experience into helping others. Catherine threw herself into searching for Lily with renewed intensity. She joined online groups focused on illegal adoptions, compiled lists of every private adoption in the region during the relevant time period, cross-referenced with missing children databases. It was exhausting, often heartbreaking work, but it gave her purpose. 5 months after Rebecca's return, in March 2023, a notification came through NamUs. A woman in South Carolina had submitted DNA to a genealogy website after discovering inconsistencies in her adoption records. Her deceased parents had been vague about the circumstances, and after finding old documents and their belongings, she'd begun to question the legitimacy of her adoption. Her DNA results showed a familial match to the Hartley family, with a probability consistent with a sibling relationship. The woman's name was Claire Pemberton. She was 36 years old, worked as a librarian, was married with 2 young children. When investigators contacted her, she was confused, then frightened, then overwhelmed. She'd always known she was adopted. Her parents had been open about that, but she'd had no reason to believe the adoption was anything but legitimate. DNA testing confirmed what the database suggested. Claire Pemberton was Lily Hartley. She'd been living a normal, happy life for 25 years, completely unaware that she'd been abducted as a child, that her biological family had spent decades searching for her. The revelation shattered her sense of identity. The parents who'd raised her, who'd died 3 and 5 years earlier respectively, had likely known something was irregular about the adoption, but had either been deceived themselves or had chosen not to look too closely. Claire was offered the choice of reconnecting with the Hartleys or maintaining distance. It was not an easy decision. She had her own life, her own family, a sense of self built over 36 years. But curiosity and a need for truth won out. The reunion between Rebecca and Lily, Claire now, though Catherine struggled to use that name, happened in a neutral setting with therapists present. They were strangers, connected by blood and shared trauma, but separated by decades of different experiences. Lily had no clear memories of the abduction or captivity. Her mind had apparently buried those 6 weeks completely, a protective response to overwhelming trauma. She remembered only fragments: a yellow dress that made her feel pretty, a bracelet on her ankle, a pervasive feeling of fear she couldn't attach to specific events. When Rebecca showed her the old photograph, both of them in the Hartley backyard, Rebecca in that yellow sundress, Lily grinning with missing front teeth, Claire broke down. Some buried part of her recognized it. Over months of therapy, a few memories surfaced. Being in a small room, being afraid, someone telling her she was special. Most remained locked away, perhaps forever. Claire agreed to limited contact with Catherine and David. She met them first in the therapist's office, then later at a coffee shop, then eventually at the house on Maple Street. She stood in the foyer where she'd presumably left that September morning in 1997 and felt nothing consciously familiar. Yet something in her chest tightened with emotion she couldn't name. She saw her childhood bedroom, preserved all these years, and cried without fully understanding why. The woman who'd orchestrated the abduction was eventually identified as Patricia Lowell, a woman with a documented history of mental illness and prior involvement in fraudulent adoption schemes. She'd moved frequently, used multiple aliases, evaded law enforcement for decades. When authorities finally located her in 2024, she was in a memory care facility in Oregon, suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease. She was deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. For Catherine and David, this was bitter closure. Justice denied, but at least certainty about who had taken their daughters. Patricia Lowell died 4 months later without ever providing full answers. Investigators theorized based on Rebecca's account and recovered records that Lowell had been operating an illegal adoption network, identifying vulnerable children and placing them with couples desperate for children who were willing to look the other way regarding legal niceties. Lily had likely been sold to the couple who became Claire's parents for a substantial sum. Rebecca, older and less compliant, hadn't been placed but had been kept and exploited for labor instead. The Hartley family today exists in complicated reality. Rebecca continues her advocacy work, speaks at conferences about long-term trafficking impacts, has written a memoir that she describes as therapy rather than literature. Catherine and David have become involved in legislative efforts to improve DNA database protocols and cross-agency communication for missing children cases. They've established a small foundation providing therapy funding for reunited families, knowing from experience how essential professional support is. Claire maintains cautious contact. She visits twice a year, sends emails monthly, has allowed her children to meet their biological grandparents under carefully controlled circumstances. She's protective of her family, uncertain about how much of the story to tell them as they grow. But she acknowledges that knowing the truth, painful as it is better than living with a foundation built on deception. The yellow sundress with the white daisy embroidery remains in a cedar chest in the upstairs hallway. Catherine took it out the day Rebecca came home, held it up with shaking hands, and wept. Rebecca asked to keep it. It now hangs in her apartment, a physical reminder of who she was and who she fought to become again. During one visit, Claire saw it and touched the fabric tentatively, running her fingers over the embroidery. She didn't say anything, but the gesture spoke across silence and years. The white patent leather shoes are long gone, but Catherine remembers them with painful clarity, polished and waiting by the door, ready for feet that never return to claim them. Sometimes, in moments of particular grief or particular gratitude, she thinks about those shoes and about how much can change in the space of a single morning, how an ordinary Sunday can become the day that divides your life into before and after. If you or someone you know is searching for a missing loved one, organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NamUs, and the DNA Doe Project offer resources and support. Forensic genealogy has revolutionized cold case investigations, identifying remains, solving decades-old disappearances, and reuniting families separated by time and trauma. DNA testing, even when done casually for ancestry or health purposes, can have profound and unexpected impacts. The Hartley family's story is extraordinary in its resolution, but not unique in its pain. Thousands of families live with the terrible uncertainty of missing children, holding on to hope even as years pass without answers. Not every story ends in reunion, and not every reunion is simple or wholly joyful. But every case that finds resolution offers something vital. An end to the agonizing not knowing, and a chance, however complicated, to begin building something new from the pieces of what was broken. Catherine still walks to First Baptist most Sundays, though the route looks different now. Rebecca sometimes joins her, and once, Claire came along, walking the 12 minutes in silence, perhaps retracing a path her feet remembered even if her mind did not. The three of them, mother and daughters, separated for 25 years and now tentatively reconnected, walk together through the town that has changed around them, past houses that have been renovated, and trees that have grown tall, and sidewalks that have been repaved over the spot where two small girls once vanished. Healing, they've learned, is not about erasing the past or pretending the lost years didn't happen. It's about acknowledging the fractures, tending to the wounds that will never fully close, and finding ways to move forward together even when the path is uncertain. They walk it anyway, one step at a time. Because after 25 years of absence, presence, however imperfect, however complicated, however marked by all that was lost, is its own kind of miracle. The journey from that September morning to this moment has been long and brutal and marked by more pain than any family should have to bear. But they survived it. They found each other. And in a world where so many searches end without answers, that alone is something worth holding on to.